Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. I am grateful. If you haven't seen these vignettes and the whole session from Mindspeak with January in Dar es Salaam last weekend, and I'll put up a photograph of the a night shot of Dar es Salaam taken from the 8th floor of the Hyatt Kilimanjaro where I was staying. If you haven't had a chance, do have a look at it. I also did a one-on-one interview. That link is also on the website, and there's a lot of stuff I asked which did not really come out in the Mindspeak session. And he was such a tremendous fellow, really. And, I'm very taken with him. And when we went to do our one-on-one interview, I went through the back stairs of the hotel with him. And he had a kind word for everybody, and everybody wanted to talk to him, a real sort of rock star quality. And it was strange that I saw it in the depths of the engine room of the Hyatt, which is an older hotel, used to be known as the Kempinski. It still has its grandeur, a little faded in parts, but a very nice place, I must admit. Macro thoughts, well, goodness. I've been stuck to my phone, I'm terrible in meetings, I'm a nightmare. But of course, we have not seen these kinds of moves. And yesterday's move in the euro dollar, on which I have to admit I was caught on the wrong side, because I was certain that the removal of patience was going to set the market, set the dollar higher. But what clearly was the case was the market was really, really short euros, and I think that's what the price action's been telling us actually. For a few days, and Nishet, who knows what I was up to, has been sort of telling me. But of course I thought I was right, and it was expensive. And then watched it go all the way to, well, I didn't watch it because I fell asleep. I was so exhausted. I had to be up all night, nearly every night. And I fell asleep. Next thing I realized, it got as high as 110.50. And we're now back at 107.10. And I think it was an enormous head fake. All the euro shorts basically got squeezed out yesterday. All the people who want to buy the euro, they bought it. And I think that's what we're seeing today, and really had to require some quick thinking early this morning. Therefore, buy the dollar and sell the euro. Home thoughts. There are dead stars that still shine because their light is trapped in time. Where do I stand in this light, which does not strictly exist? Don DeLillo. Al Jazeera News tweeted, the face of victory, Bibi Netanyahu. He's a magician, the crowd chanted, according to Reuters yesterday. Interesting report in the Financial Times, China with friends like these. And this is something that I found interesting. In global terms, the defeat of Mahinda Rajapaksa in Sri Lanka's presidential elections in January ranked as a mere political tremor. But for China's policy of financial diplomacy, a key strand in Beijing's strategy to win friends and commercial advantage around the world, the loss has been convulsive enough to rearrange the region's diplomatic furniture. Sri Lanka's new leader, Maithripala Sirisena, has not hid his antipathy toward China. In a veiled reference to Chinese policy-backed loans worth several $1 billion, Mr. Sirisena blamed foreigners during his election campaign for stealing his country. This robbery is taking place before everybody and in broad daylight, and if this trend continues for another 6 years, our country would become a colony and we would become slaves, he said in his manifesto. Since his victory, Colombo has informed Beijing that it is reviewing the terms of its loans. It has also suspended work on a $1.5 billion port project, being built by the state-owned China Communications Construction Company. Sirisena also stepped up his courtship of China's main regional competitor by welcoming Narendra Modi on his first visit by an Indian premier for 28 years. The reversal is not an isolated setback for China's checkbook foreign policy, but the latest in a string of upsets that have punctuated Beijing's attempts to secure resources, markets, and strategic alliances in developing countries with policy-driven loan deals. Ukraine is heavily in arrears in its Chinese lending. Zimbabwe has failed to repay a much smaller amount. Other recipients of Chinese policy-driven finance, such as Venezuela, Ecuador and Argentina, are suffering varying degrees of economic distress. China is taking on too much risk in its lending to regimes that are unstable in Africa, Latin America, and even in some Asian countries. Many Chinese institutions thought as long as they had made deals with the governments, the deals are done, but political reality is much more complicated. Indeed it is. For China, there is much more than money at stake. Beijing has used its status as the world's biggest provider of development finance to burnish claims of leadership in the developing world, deploying funds from its $3.8 trillion in foreign currency reserves to boost relations with countries that sometimes have an anti-US agenda. But there are signs that Beijing is growing less tolerant of the more egregious risks, a trend that could deprive some of the world's most fragile economies of crucial lines of credit. That's a really valid point. Some of these loans have no chance of repayment at all. Interesting sentence in an article I was reading on global research. While the US has been partially successful in dividing Europe from Russia, entirely successful, it's totally failed in keeping Moscow and Beijing apart. Fair point. Senegal's president wants to shorten his term in office to set an example. He's a star. That's in the Washington Post. Biggest problem in Africa is leaders seeking to stay indefinitely in power. Now, the Federal Reserve Chair, Janet Yellen, opened the door to an interest rate increase as soon as June by removing the word patient, but then reduced the forward guidance. Basically, the Fed had been speaking of short-term interest rates of 1 1/8% by the year end. They've dropped that to 0.625%. But more than anything, I think it was a story of a market which was heavily short the euro. And that's why we got this such an extreme move. I think it was the biggest move we've seen in 15 years. And I'll put up some images from Nanex LLC currency pairs, compare the reaction to the Fed at 2 p.m. with the dollar flash crash at 4:04 p.m. And then another one which I call dollar head fake, and you had this enormous rally as every single short was squeezed out all the way up, apparently in the middle of the night at 1:10:50 when Nishat was awake and I wish she'd woken me up. But by that stage I was pretty tired because it's been going on for quite a while. Dollar sags, bonds boom, that was the immediate reaction. Euro surge, short-term US yields, biggest drop in 6 years. Yellen mentioned that she was uncomfortable with the strength of the dollar, but I don't think it's going to play as big a role as many of the international commentators are thinking. Swiss franc, sterling, Aussie dollar all enjoyed extraordinary gains, and then in the middle of the night it got squeezed again, extreme squeeze, before turning lower, and currently the euro dollar is below 107. And we were as high as 110.50, just to give you a frame of reference. And the low, recent low, was 104.79. So we're just 2 points off the low, point of fact. Basically, it was a massive short squeeze, and it's actually put the markets back into equilibrium, and it's made it much easier to sell the euro, in point of fact. The euro is now at 106.93. Dollar index, therefore, in the morning when I came in was at 98.219, must be higher. Japanese yen is at 120.63. Swissy, which had a very strong session yesterday and actually rallied ahead of everything else, 0.933. Aussie 0.7673. India rupee must be at 62.80. Rial 324.09, but I think that's going straight for Egyptian pound 762.87, and the rand this morning was at 1208.82 when I walked in. I doubt it's there now. I'll put up a 5-day chart of the dollar index, and clearly I think that's a big buy. I think this was a big head fake that we've just been in. Dollar index, I'll put up a 1-year chart as well. Euro dollar, I'll put up a 5-day chart. You can see what I mean. Look at that move. That's the biggest move in about 15 years. And sterling, I'll put up a 3-day chart as well. That's at 148.40, and that also I think got above 151. yesterday. Gold, I'll put up 5-day chart up. We're trading at 1166.63 last. It's a big sell. I think it's going below 1,000. Crude oil, I'll put up a 3-day chart. Well, of course, with the dollar selling off, crude had a big rally, but I think this is another opportunity to sell because storage is now full, and I think we're about to tumble below 40. Coming to Africa, Tunisia museum shooting. Country in shock as Tunis attack leaves more than 20 people dead. I'll put up a couple of images. It was the cradle of the Arab Revolution or the Arab Spring, and that's a bit of a concern about spillover risks continuing. South Sudan's Kiir shrugs off UN threat of sanctions. The threat of sanctions has been waived in my eyes, but I cannot be threatened with that, Kiir told thousands of supporters in Juba's Freedom Square, the site of its independence celebrations in mid-2011. Kiir said he appreciated foreign efforts to bring peace too, but said he was disappointed that some of the international community had focused on sanctions rather than encouraging the peace-building process. I agree with that report by the African Union that both him and Machar don't deserve to be negotiating anything. South Sudan Salva Kiir acknowledges his supporters as he arrives to address a rally at the John Garang Mausoleum in the capital Juba. I've been there to that mausoleum March 18, 2015. S. Northfield 45 tweeted, "Where are the arrested Kinshasa activists? No access to lawyer. Family raises safety concerns. The arrest of at least 26 activists and others in Kinshasa on March 15 raises serious concerns of a broader crackdown on free expression before the 2016 DRC presidential elections." That's Human Rights Watch. Called on the UN Security Council members who are due to discuss the situation in Congo on March 19 to publicly press Congolese authorities to immediately release all those detained for their peaceful activities and speech. And of course, there was an extraordinary blowback when everyone felt that the president was trying either to delay or to go for a third term. So it's a very pressurized situation. The Africa CEO Forum in 2014 saw Africa sought 656 mergers and acquisitions, up 10% from 2013. There's been a lot of that going on. Unrest spreads ahead of presidential vote as Gabon goes Bongo on Bongo. Couldn't resist that headline. Strikes in schools, hospitals, private business. Core rallied by a score of trade unions in the public sector. Teachers and health workers have stayed off work since the beginning of February. And, the pressure's been building there. And I remember when President Bongo took off to the Charlie Hebdo walk, there was a lot of sarcasm about what exactly he was doing there. Luanda, human rights activists and journalists are increasingly being targeted by the regime of Angolan President José Eduardo dos Santos. This is not a good sign either. Prepaid Africa tweeted Africa's projected urbanization trends as per the PwC infographic from that report about Africa's cities, which was a very good report. South African All Share up 5.55% year to date. Dollar Rand, it was at 12.10 this morning, and I was thinking, what a sell, and I'm sure it's a lot higher. A lot lower. Spicy chicken billionaire springs from South Africa with Nando's. It's lunchtime in Cape Town. A stream of visitors are lining up at the Nando's restaurant Long Street. A cashier, Zintha Loza, tries to take phone orders over the din of Portuguese-inspired music. "I have regular customers every day," Loza said. "I hear their voice and know what they are going to order." Long lines at Nando's, which opened its first eatery in South Africa in the late 1980s, are a common sight at outlets far away from Cape Town. The fast-growing spicy chicken chain has 1,100 locations in 22 countries, helping make its original backer, Dick Enthoven, a billionaire. And it's Afro-Portuguese quick-service restaurants, signature peri-peri chili marinated chicken. There used to be one in Putney, in point of fact. A half bird sells for £7 in London, and which is $10.27, and $4.70 in Cape Town. Nando's has done really well because the whole concept is based around a very simple product which everyone understands. They deliver the product imaginatively with great fun at a very good price. The company's playful marketing ploys, such as the finger selfie campaign, where people share pictures of their digits in creative situations, play especially well with youthful customers. Egyptian pound, pretty much unchanged, 762.91. Foreign Secretary Hammond is in town here in Nairobi. And I was going through his Twitter feed, and I saw that on March 13 he was in Egypt and caught up with John Kerry at the Egypt Investment Conference, where a ton of money was promised. Egyptian stock market up 6.28% year to date. Nigeria all-share 3-day losing streak. It's now down 13.92% year to date. President Goodluck Jonathan swore in 8 new ministers, shoring up his power base just 10 days before a closely fought presidential poll. There's going to be a runoff. Pioneer Foods, a South African food and beverage producer, plans acquisitions in at least 5 more African countries after taking a majority holding in its Nigerian competitor Food Concepts plc. Ghana Stock Exchange down 3.28% year to date, but I think that's on the mend now. BBC World Service tweeted the East African wonderful rare archive of Kenyan veterans of the King's African Rifles World War I, and it's a lovely photograph. John Githongo, who was a guest on Mindspeak as well, says corruption has opened the door to Al-Shabaab in Kenya. Ironically, and he's talking about these security contracts, which were largely fictitious. They were fictitious. These contracts that were in Kenyan parlance eaten by the elite that opened the door to Al-Shabaab, the Somali terrorist group, which now poses a significant threat to the Kenyan state. The door was opened because the kit that was supposed to safeguard Kenyan borders to ensure national security simply wasn't in place to interdict terrorists. Eaten were the contracts for a robust immigration control system and for basic police communications equipment. I'll put up a photograph of teams working to recover bodies trapped under the building adjacent to the US Embassy, which collapsed following the 1998 terrorist attack, later claimed by Al-Qaeda. And I'll put up a photograph I took of Westgate, which was apparently on fire at the time, but the whole story behind that was interesting in itself. That was 541 days ago. Chase Bank is set to raise an additional 2.5 billion Kenya shillings through a private placement to fund its fast-paced growth, the institution's management has disclosed. Nairobi all-share up 6.03% year-to-date, 2.749% below a record high from the 25th of February. Nairobi NSE 20 is up 4.57% in 2015, and yesterday snapped an 11-session losing streak to turn 0.5% higher. Interesting report that PwC won about the continent's cities of opportunity. In it, they said Nairobi outscores all African cities in FDI, and that's very believable. Tea prices hit a 2-year high at auction in Mombasa that surged 8% week on week. This is all around the drought. Sasini popped 8.75% higher. Safaricom rallied 0.9615% at close at 15.75. Was stretching to trade at session highs of 15.90 at the finish. It's plus 12.099% in 2015, remains in a relentless bull trend, all set to pop through 60. Standard Group, which reported full-year earnings the day before, where revenue actually marginally declined, reacted 8.64% yesterday. Co-op Bank reported full-year earnings, 14.092 acceleration in profit before tax and exceptional items, but then booked an exceptional item of 1.34 billion to do with redundancies, early retirement. Therefore, profit after tax declined 12.002%. Struck an upbeat note in its investor briefing, saying they're projecting a 30% growth in profitability in 2015. KCB unchanged at 60, but all set to push through to new all-time highs. EABL rallied a further 1.59% to close at 319. That was on heavy volume. EABL has rallied 13.636% from the start of the year through the 19th of February, subsequently corrected 15.741% 19th of February through the 4th of March, and in a very overcooked sell-off, I mentioned it, and now it's on the bounce. It's rebounded 8.1355%, headed higher. Mumias issued a stock exchange notice yesterday for an extraordinary general meeting, which will be held at the Tom Mboya Labour College, Kisumu, on Friday, the 10th of April, to conduct the following business, of which item 3 reads change in capital structure. Item 4 is a rights issue, ticked 5 cents easier, but I would have thought people are going to come in order to play a role in that in that sort of roadmap that's been outlined. Once again, thank you for stopping by.